Happy Thursday afternoon, and thank you for joining us. This is another edition of Thirsty Thursday with the Maryland Spirits producers and the Maryland Distillers Guild. We are celebrating Maryland Spirits Month. Today is National Happy Hour Day, so you've chosen a great day to tune in with us. As we go through today's talk about whiskey, please feel free to ask your questions, share your comments, maybe share your favorite whiskey cocktail with everybody in the comments section. And we'll refer to those. So if you want to know anything in particular about how whiskey's made, what the favorite whiskey is of some of the members of our panel, feel free to drop it into the comments and we'll address those as we're going. We've got a great panel today representing 5 different distilleries from around the state. A lot of really great approaches to whiskey and really good products. We're going to talk about rye. We'll talk about bourbon. We'll talk about a lot of history. And maybe we'll give you some new trivia or trivial knowledge for the next time you're playing trivia. So to introduce our guest today, I'm going to be joined by Brad with Lost Ark Distillery. Brad, how you doing?
Good, Jim. Appreciate you having us on. Thanks
for joining. What's your favorite whiskey cocktail as we're talking about Happy Hour Day?
I'm a purist. I'm just a good old-fashioned. If I'm not drinking neat, just an old-fashioned. I don't like to muddle it up too much.
All right, I like that. From not too far down the road from Brad, we've got Dan at Miscellaneous. Dan, how you doing today?
Doing great. How you guys?
I'm well. How do you like to drink your whiskey?
I'm like Brad. I like it neat, but if I'm going to cut it with anything, it's probably going to be a whiskey highball, so just a little club soda.
There you go. We've got Brian from Sagamore. Brian, how are you this afternoon?
Good, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. What's the whiskey cocktail du jour for you?
I like a Manhattan. No complaints.
I lean your way. I'm a Manhattan guy also.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
We've got Scott with Twin Tobacco Barn Distillery out in Hollywood. How are you, Scott?
Good. How you doing today?
Doing well. How are you drinking your whiskey these days?
You know, I like a Manhattan too, but I've been introduced to a thing called a black Manhattan, which is made with a Verna instead of sweet vermouth. And I kind of go in between doing it with rye or bourbon. It's great both ways.
There you are. And last but not least, we've got John with Twin Valley in Rockville. John, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
How are you drinking your wide variety of whiskeys and bourbons?
I mean, like the guy said, if I'm not drinking it neat, I'll sometimes go crazy and get a whiskey sour or something. But
man, you're really throwing it out there.
Yeah, I'm a pretty easy going when it comes to that.
Well, like I said before, we've got a really great crew today. We hope the next 45 minutes to an hour is fun and entertaining and educational for everybody who's tuning in. If you're watching this and it's not live, feel free to leave a comment for us or check back for any comments that we may add to clear up some pieces of information or to answer individuals who have posted. Also, please visit all of these great distilleries online through either their social media or on their websites. They're making great products for you, and they appreciate all of your input and following. So thank you very much for that. Let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about whiskey. Who wants to tell us the tale of where whiskey comes from and how it got here? No takers?
I believe it was the Scots.
Good start.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about getting to Maryland here a little bit. So because we do bourbon, and it's kind of follows the path of Basil Hayden. If people have heard of Basil Hayden, there's a Basil Hayden bourbon today. There's also it's called Old Grandad, and the caricature is a guy that's Basil Hayden on there. So it goes all the way back to the English Reformation through a lot of nonsense. But anyways, at the time, once Henry VIII pushed all the priests and bishops and friars out of the churches and cathedrals in England, they knew how to distill because they were making brandy and they were making cognac and things like that. But they had to make a living. So they had the distilling technology. So the Catholics in Scotland, England, and Ireland kind of put that together. So it's no coincidence that in the early 1600s, the first whiskey distillery on planet Earth opens up in Ireland. A little bit later, Maryland's founded. North of the Potomac, you get Catholics. South of the Potomac, you don't. So a lot of them came here. Not all of them, but a lot of them did. So that's kind of the shortened version.
Did you say 1600 is when the first whiskey distilleries were opening in Ireland?
Yeah, it's old Bushmills. I don't know, 1606, 1608, something like that.
That's
And
surprising.
then the first mention of, Whiskey Bay or whatever it is, it's like, 1494 when the King of England orders it from somebody in Scotland.
Okay. That makes more sense. I was going to be a little afraid if gin had like a 300-year jump on whiskey. I figured that they would have been drinking whiskey a little bit before then.
Yeah.
So there's this very rich history of whiskey in Maryland. We talk about that almost every time we address whiskey, and there's a rich history of rye whiskey specifically in Maryland that has carried through and endured. Does anybody want to kind of share how Maryland became the place for rye whiskey and what set it apart from other places in the region?
I've heard Brian tell this story a couple times.
Ryan's the best one to do this.
We'll see. I'll go ahead and take a swing at it. This is my version of it, but hanging out with a group like this, you always learn a lot, as well as others in the industry. So it's always evolving a bit, but I think we find, my understanding is we find that Maryland was a lot of rum in the very beginning, and the 1600s and so forth, and then it was right around the time where our relationships maybe with the British and the government, it's kind of interesting because a lot of it still applies today in some ways, started escalating, and it was 1733. You had the Molasses Tax Act, where the British started hitting us with tariffs and taxes on the molasses and sugars coming out of the British West Indies. And of course, being very resourceful people here, especially in the Baltimore region, the Inner Harbor being one of the second largest sites for immigration next to Ellis Island, we had a tremendous amount of Scotch, Irish, German, Polish folks that knew how to distill grain-based type products. And of course, they just really didn't want to pay they liked a good drink, but they didn't like paying taxes either, or tariffs. And so I think it was right around that time, I think you started seeing things really kind of switch over to grain-based type products, because we grew a lot of rye as a cover crop to help out with the tobacco fields. And then, even in 1756, you have the Suppliers Bill Act, where it actually, you got tax benefits for, working with locally sourced grains, which was really cool, and fruits and so forth. And then, of course, things continue to escalate with the British. We go into a little something called the Revolutionary War, and come out with $54 million in debt. And of course, they say good way for that to pay down that debt is, why don't we go ahead and raise taxes and tariffs on whiskey and so forth. And of course, we don't like that. And that's right around the time, the 1780s, 1790s, you start having the Whiskey Rebellion and the rumblings of that. And that's, I think, right around the time too, where, Scott was saying, folks like Basil Hayden and Jacob and Mary Beam and the Beam family, and I even was talking to Fawn Weaver. She thinks Uncle Nearest may have got his start up this way too. Really started pushing out and getting away from places that were established and close to the government, like Washington, D.C. and so forth, and moved to places that weren't developed yet, but eventually would be called Kentucky in 1792. And so I think, that's how we kind of got our start, is my understanding. And then from there, eventually, the Pennsylvania, even Indiana, Maryland, Virginia, all start to kind of flourish as whiskey producers. And then, of course, during the Civil War, you had a lot of people going up and down the East Coast. And I think that's when Maryland really started to get its reputation as a really high quality, superior type rye whiskey for different reasons, whether it's, some people say it's more approachable or sweeter. But that's really our understanding, maybe, of how we got our start here in Maryland, how we got our reputation, and then it kind of flourished from there. But, I'll take any insight from this group as well on their version or what they've heard. But that's how we spin it a little bit at Sagamore. We try and be accurate. It's hard finding a lot of this information, though, so you kind of piece it together over the years. And it's constantly evolving as you learn more as you go on. So I welcome any insight at all from this group or anybody in the chat.
I just want to say that I think that it's pretty fascinating that this idea of dodging taxation was kind of an inherent business plan for some of these folks, and it ended up turning into such a black market way of running and operating a business for so long for so many people. And I'm curious if, as people were expanding away from the establishment and away from the hand of the tax collector, if they were above board right away, or if it was something that may have been skirting the law and then flourished into something that had to be run appropriately because of its popularity.
I would say there's a lot of skirting of the law, and it depends on your size, right? I mean, the smaller you are, it probably was easier to skirt along, and I just think it's interesting too. The tariffs are still a problem to this day, and so forth. So it's one of these things. Here we are talking about something from 1733, and here we are in 2020, and a lot of the same issues, and the federal excise tax, and looking at a potential 400% increase next year on that. And so it's incredible how so many of the stories and the things that really kind of cause trouble for our business is allowing our business to grow and hire and invest in local communities are still an issue today.
No doubt about that. Since you brought it up, why don't we talk about the excise tax issue right up front, since this is kind of a real hot button topic, and it's something that a lot of people may not be totally aware of. Since 2017, distilleries and distilling companies have benefited from a reduce in excise tax, and we've been asking the federal government to make this a long-standing tax relief and maybe actually make it permanent. And there hasn't been a whole lot of movement. What would this raise in excise taxes do to your independent businesses?
I mean, it's pretty detrimental, I think, to anybody that's on this call. A 400% increase really just it's going to eliminate a lot of positions that we might have, whether they're part-time or full-time, and it's also going to reduce our production. That tax bill going up by 400% is something that, sure, when we started our businesses, we all planned for, but as the downturn with COVID and everything, it has come about, we're really looking more and more like this 400% increase that's going to hit us come February 1 is going to be just a kick in the gut.
On a year that's been, I would say, unstable would be a good way to say.
Yeah, that's
like, it's like you're lacking confidence as is. You're not sure how to approach and plan for next year for your business and the people you've hired. And you just want stability and you want clarity so you can plan and move forward. And there's none of that here at the time on something that's, it's will you be able to scale up production? Will you be able to hire someone to add to sales or marketing to help you grow your business? Will you be able to maybe pay a little bit more for local agriculture? And will you be able to invest in the local community and the farmers and so forth? And instead, it's just hold on to your money, because for me, it's just there's so much uncertainty, and it's hard to go out there with confidence and spend money right now.
And it has ripple effects. I'm sure we're all the same. We probably 84 cents on every dollar we spend is spent in Maryland and in our communities. So there's a velocity of money factor there too. It goes to the communities, helping out Maryland. So the upcoming potential tax increase is catastrophic, not just for our industry, but other businesses.
Especially too in an industry like ours where we have to be predictive of the future anyway, and nothing that we do is going to happen quickly or overnight anyway. So it can be even more of an issue to try and plan things long term with something like a 400% increase in that tax. That can really be detrimental in the short term, but we might not even see how bad it is until a year or 2 years from now.
And for anybody who's viewing that doesn't understand how the excise tax piece works, this is taxation on the product that's being produced, which is kind of a crazy thing. This isn't even on a product that's sold. This is on something that's put into a package and is ready to be sold in the future. So these businesses are essentially prepaying tax on products that haven't even been sold out into the marketplace yet. And it's an interesting position to be in, because it puts more pressure on the business to sell the product faster and get it out there. And right now you pay it on two levels, right? You pay it at the state and at the federal level. And we're talking about federal tax increase of what amounts to 400% of what you're paying right now.
Yeah, I think, just so people know, like, we're not looking for anything special treatment. We're just looking for parity with beer and wine. So it's something that, when we look at the alcohol beverage industry as a whole, we're just looking for parity. Spirits have always been paying a lot more than everybody else. So we're just trying to get parity with the rest of the industry. So not necessarily looking for anything special treatment or anything along those lines. And you think about, there's a lot of distilleries in Maryland and throughout this country that have actually never paid the original excise tax of $13.50 a gallon. So I can only imagine how difficult it is to plan and think about that change in your business plan.
Yeah, it's a very wild thing. It's crazy that this is something that's been basically allowed to happen in terms of the relief, but it seems like there's some hesitation for the government to really take action and make this a long-standing or permanent deal. And it would be wonderful to see them get behind small independent businesses that are trying to hire people in communities and make communities flourish, and give you guys the opportunity to benefit from that relief on an ongoing basis. So for anybody that's out there, when we post stuff about excise tax relief, this is what we're talking about. You've heard from these businesses how it would impact them. Please help us when we share those petitions to throw your name on or to write it to your representatives in Washington, because they need to hear about this and how important this is to these companies.
And we got strong bipartisan support on both sides of the aisle, which in this day and age right now seems a little doesn't happen very often. So that's just the thing, is like there's a lot of support for this, but they haven't been able to get it go through. And if we can't get it to go through, by the end of the year, all that support kind of goes away and we just have to start over again.
So for the fun part of today's conversation, now we got the excise tax piece out of the way.
Boy, I need a drink. You got me so depressed.
I'm like, we need to change subjects quickly.
Let's talk a little bit about what brought each of your distilleries to the marketplace with the idea to produce a whiskey product or to produce what your portfolio is made up of. And we can just go right around the horn. Brad, you had a recent release of a bourbon. It's the first time you guys have put it out. From what I hear, it's doing very well. The feedback on the bourbon is excellent. What inspired you to get that out, or was that something you guys have been working on for a while?
Well, everything in the distillery takes a little while, right? So obviously planning for quite a while. Circling back to before the bourbon, though, like we were talking about the Maryland history. When I started digging into, a lot of our background for Lost Ark is based on Maryland history. So digging back into some of that, and having so much rum and the history of Maryland, it made it important to me to create a product that kind of represented that history. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't appreciate rum before we started making it here until I started to try to craft a recipe. And I learned really fast how difficult it is to make a really good rum. So we worked on that for a long time, and we've laid down a few of our own barrels of whiskey. Haven't started our rye program yet, but we have a few barrels of bourbon, and we just brought in this curated version, our sub-brand Trailblazer, and I'm pretty excited about that. And what we wanted to do with that is kind of find a whiskey that represented, what we do here locally. And we can get back into some of that history in a minute, because I love talking about that stuff. But what's readily available in Maryland is tons of wheat. Wheat's a great cover crop. So our mash bill for bourbon that we create at Lost Ark and for our curated is corn, heavy corn, 70% corn. And then we use a wheat instead of rye, like the traditional bourbon mash bill, and then malted barley. So it's an interesting mash bill. It goes along with some of the other bourbons in the market, like the Weller's, Larceny, things like that. But it's my personal favorite. It's my go-to. The wheat gives you a softer, mellow, more approachable, more drinkable, kind of a daily drinker sort of bourbon, in my opinion. So we're excited about the brand. We're excited about our own barrels aging, and excited to start rye sometime as well.
Well, you guys definitely timed it very well, because you rolled out a new look for your brand. You have this new identity on your bottles, and then it was like within a couple of weeks I started hearing, oh, look out, there's going to be a bourbon coming right behind it. So way to go, and congratulations on the release.
Yeah, talking about a whirlwind of a year, being shut down and not knowing how to plan anything, and all this happened. We were changing distributors and kind of repackaging everything, and then we shut down all at the same time. So wow, I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy to see that coming, and I can't wait for 21 to get here, honestly.
And since we have a couple of other bourbon producers on, I'm going to talk a little bit about rye, and we'll bounce back and forth. That way we can kind of keep the conversation going. Dan, you guys make some great rye whiskey at MISCellaneous. You want to talk about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, sure thing. So it was kind of one of the reasons we got into distilling. It was one of the two big reasons. I wanted to make a barrel-aged rum, but the other thing I wanted to do is make my rye whiskey, which is my Gertrude's 100% rye whiskey. So that's 100% rye in the mash bill, nothing malted, no other corn or anything else. It's a finicky grain, but we do love the way it tastes, the flavor profile. Very bready, but also a little bit of that black pepper spice that rye is known for. And this was just something that I really wanted to do. And having that great history in Maryland with rye, I just wanted to do my own interpretation of it as well. So, it's not the typical rye mash bill that you hear when you hear Maryland rye, being more of a little bit sweeter, a little bit softer. This is definitely a full in-your-face, heavy rye, but that's what I love about it. So, I don't know. We love making it. People love drinking it. And when I started thinking, well, okay, I'm gonna also get into bourbon. I didn't want to make a bourbon like everybody else was making, so I went ahead and made my Brill's Batch bourbon whiskey at 51% corn and 49% rye. So we just meet that legal definition of a bourbon, but still really, really heavily rye influence. So it's this bourbon is probably closer to a Maryland rye than my actual rye is.
So the only distinction here for any novice drinkers or people who are not whiskey aficionados or fans out of the gate is that the stipulation on bourbon has to do with the build out of the grist bill, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, 51% corn is the delineation, and then after that it can be whatever other grain you want to supplement.
Is it whatever else you want to supplement? Because I know
it's all cereal grains.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can't throw anything in there, but you'll definitely go to the shelf and see some oated bourbons and other things. So as long as it falls within that cereal grain, you're gonna meet the definition.
Got it. And the geographical prefix or whatever does not preclude any spirit from being called bourbon, so long as it meets the.
As long as you're within the United States.
Perfect. So there's the clarification. So there's nobody that needs to start yelling about it's not made in Kentucky, it can't be bourbon or anything like that.
I mean, let them yell. They do it all the time. How many of us on this call have been saying, well, we make bourbon? Well, you can't do that. You're not in Kentucky. To the customer at your tasting room. And well, I mean, I can pull up the regs, but you're not going to believe me because you already have it in your mind because Kentucky's got one of the greatest marketing programs in the world.
How do we take that and make it ours?
We're never going to do that. I mean, I actually thank Kentucky for making bourbon what it is. I mean, they've spent a lot of money bringing bourbon to prominence. We're just bringing a little bit of it back over here.
Well, Scott, you've got a really good point there, because if it weren't for how bourbon flourished in Kentucky and how there was so much demand for it, there probably wouldn't be such global demand right now for American-made whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, well, and we're a bourbon distillery, so and everybody knows it takes a long time. So 92% everything we made is still sitting in the rick house. We grow the corn that we make our bourbon out of, so it's pretty, it's a passion of labor. And then I go back to Basil Hayden because, and what Brian said, they didn't write much down, but Basil Hayden was making something. It was not a brown liquor in the 1700s because life was awful in the 1700s in Maryland and for a farmer, and they drank it clear. I got news for you. And that it went in a clay jug or something. So, but we know it was rye forward because Basil Hayden bourbon today is rye forward. That's just an acknowledged thing. And so we do that. We're a throwback to Basil Hayden here. We use about 23% rye. That gives it that nice, peppery rye flavor. The Kentucky guys will say, well, Basil Hayden, he didn't, he learned to distill in Kentucky. I said, well, first of all, he got there, it was called Virginia because it was 1786. And he did not learn to distill on the flatboat from Pittsburgh down to Maysville, Ohio. It did not happen that way. But, he didn't write his mash bill down. He didn't have all this, but we know this. He brought with him whatever the precursors to this were. It was clear. He brought with him Catholicism. They had the first Catholic church west of the Appalachians. They brought with them tobacco. They started tobacco culture. They brought with them all the family names. So if you get to Nelson County, Kentucky, and St. Mary's County, there's Wathans, Wathans, Willets, Haydens, Mattingleys, Rayleys. It's all the same people. And they have even the same family recipes are the same. There's this goofy thing we have down here called stuffed ham. It's only two places in the world, Southern Maryland and Nelson County, Kentucky. I mean, you can, the guys can say that, that he didn't know how to do it. That Western Virginia in 1786 was not an industrialized society. They did not know how to bend copper. They brought that stuff with them.
What is a stuffed ham?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was infatuating, but what's up with the ham?
Oh, it's just a local thing we do down here. It's you take a corned ham, you slice it, you put in field greens, like kale and those type of things, put it in there. You either boil it or bake it. That has started family feuds unto itself, whether you boil it or bake it. And then here's the weird thing, you serve it cold. So, yeah. But that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you don't want to. Yeah, I tell you what, this goes awesome with it. You get some bourbon.
Just give me the bourbon. I'll leave the ham.
Yeah. Brian, tell us.
Well, the other thing is, rye's a winter crop. So most people who distilled bourbon back then, they did it in the winter because you don't distill bourbon in the summer if you're that smart. I mean, I don't even like distilling bourbon in the summer now but you need cooling. I mean, so back then it was about 3 or 4 months. They did it and so tobacco, which is another, tobacco is a summer crop. You harvest that in September or so. And then rye, you plant it in November. And it's not a cover crop because it doesn't work that way. You have to have separate fields. But anyways.
On the talk of rye, Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about Sagamore Spirit's rye and what's compelling you guys to continue to make a great product?
Well, going back to, we're talking about Kentucky and everything. We always like to kind of throw little pebbles at Kentucky because we always call rye whiskey bourbon's older brother. Because I think, really the original American whiskey was a rye whiskey, and it started right here in the Mid-Atlantic region. So for us, that's kind of what inspires us every day, is we think it's a great story that, we once had here in the Mid-Atlantic region, and we can have it again. And so we just for right now concentrate on rye whiskey, and we basically have 3 core products. We have our signature rye, which is very easy, approachable rye whiskey, easy to drink, still stands up in a cocktail. Then we have a double oak, which is finished in a second maturation in another new American toasted barrel, and then a cask strength version of our signature. And so those are kind of our 3 core products. And then we do a reserve series that comes out once or twice a year. It's usually some type of finishing in a beer barrel or a wine barrel or something along those lines. That's really just kind of where we're focused right now, and someday might expand, but we're just kind of piggybacking off of the things that we used to do great here in Maryland.
That's awesome. I appreciate all the finishes that you guys are putting out and exploring. It gives the consumer an opportunity to really taste how whiskey can adapt to a different environment in the barrel, and it really brings out a lot of unique characteristics when you're tasting different types of wood or vessels that have held other beverages in the past. It's a great way to have fun with something that you may consider to be something you're familiar with.
Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun, and it's kind of just like a little bit of R&D, and just whiskey is a pretty amazing thing. If you put it in a barrel and maybe at first you don't love it, you just put it back up on the rack, and wait another 2 to 3 years or whatever, or 18 months or 6 months. It's I always say I'm so glad we don't sell tomatoes, because like those go perishable pretty quickly. Whiskey, we just throw back on the racks and just wait it out. It always seems to come around.
Has your local history around whiskey started any feuds over food?
No, man. Like, we think it goes great with everything with those, whatever he was describing there, I'm sure. I mean, to a great steak to a roller dog from 7-Eleven if need be, like whatever you're into, like I think you're well with it all.
And John, tell us a little bit about what Twin Valley's doing, what your approaches are. You guys do bourbon, rye, you do everything. You kind of do a little bit of everything involved with whiskey, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's met or knows Edgar knows that he loves experimenting, can never leave well enough alone. He comes from a culinary background, so that's really a chefy mentality that he has. So he's always throwing it at the wall, seeing what sticks. Bourbon is something that he learned the hard way. It was not what he set out to do when he started, but as he, developed the brand and learned more about Maryland and its history and learned that we are a whiskey state at our heart, that was something that he committed himself to do. So really glad that people came back after that first barrel of bourbon that had, I would say, varying degrees of success. We've gotten a lot better at our craft since then, and we're going to keep going and just try and produce as much as we can, put it to store, and see how long we can get away with not selling it.
So let's talk a little bit about how things have been over the last few months. It's been an opportunity for everybody to kind of approach their business in a bit of a different way than they were prior to February. People are rebranding. We've seen several distilleries throughout the state doing that. Bringing new products to market seems to still be one of the priorities for just about everybody. We've got Scott doing things like loading up fighter aircraft with whiskey to fly around. What is it about the last couple of months that's given you guys more of a fire to get things done and to make whiskey as great as you can?
Oh man, it's been an adapt or die situation basically. It's definitely been some, and thank God for spirits. It's been key. But I for us, one of the things, at least for we experience as a small, a lot of people came up to us and said, well, you guys seem like you're killing it, with everything going on, everyone's buying up booze, and that's the craze. I hear about this liquor stores being raided. And for us, that wasn't really the case. I think we saw a lot of people return back to comfort brands like Jack Daniels and Bacardi and all these things, and didn't have a chance to really kind of come up with shop and have discovery brands, and spend time in an aisle with someone from a store, maybe hand selling it and telling you a little bit about the story. Obviously, we lost our tasting rooms for a while, but thanks to the guild, you guys really be able to come back and us be able to do curbside pickup. That's been huge for our business. That's really been something that we see as a staple going forward. And then, obviously the direct to consumer, for us to be able to ship our spirits now in state, I can't tell you how incredible that's been for us and how incredibly important it is. So there are people who do know Sagamore. And, in the current situation, people don't always want to go shop at a store and just for us to be able to keep up with that, the folks in Kentucky can now do it. And so just having these little things that allow us to compete has been great. And thanks to you guys helping change legislation and so forth. And then everybody, I'm sure, has pivoted throughout 2020 in multiple ways and multiple times. Some things that are really exciting that, the end long run, we might look here and say, well, hopefully we get direct to consumer permanently. And, if it wasn't for COVID, that may have not happened, or it may have been 25 more years before that happened. So I'd like to be optimistic about things to come eventually, too, as we get back on track. And that some conveniences that have come out of this for the consumer, and we can do it in a responsible way, in a safe manner, and provide these luxuries as far as convenience to the consumers and help compete against the big guys. It's been great. And thank you guys for helping us make that happen.
Brad, was there a plan for Lost Ark to go through kind of a rebirth of its brand prior to all of this happening? Or was it just like the timing's right? This is the time for us to do it?
No, we had actually been in planning for months and months. I'd been interviewing firms to work on our redesign for almost a year. So it kind of hit us. I don't know if you could say, I always try to be positive at bad time or good time, but we end up making things work. But I think one of the big important things about the whole COVID and having to shut down for a while and readdressing how we approach the public, and like Brian was saying, the way we really thrive as a small distillery is getting our story in front of people and having the customer or the consumer taste it. But just being able to step back, I mean, for me personally, step back and reflect, kind of look back over the last couple of years, look at some things we did right, some things we did wrong, and how can we pivot and grow from that? To me, that's really what I try to look back and focus on in a positive manner and think about, let's make the best that we can out of a bad situation. So to me, it wasn't a bad situation. We took the time, we used it wisely. We got our repack done. We've been working on building our team here. So it for us, it was, I don't want to say it was a good thing, but it was a time that we made the most positive that we could out of it.
I feel like it's an interesting, it's tough to call it an opportunity, but if you're firing on all cylinders and operating your business every day the same way that you have been, it's hard to be able to take that breath and look around you and say, hey, how do we tackle the rest of these things that are priorities when our priority is going to be having guests in the tasting room this afternoon or something like that. There's probably almost this ability to, when things slow down, take real good stock about what's going on and figure out how to address the priorities that exist outside of the four walls that you're used to looking at.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes every person in this group right now exceptional, is that during a hard time you can pivot and find positive out of it and then grow. We all had to do that. A lot of us pivoted to make hand sanitizer. Our operations completely changed for that. Our whole supply chain, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. It was difficult, but I mean, cheers to everybody for getting through this. It was a difficult few months.
Jana from our team would like to let you know that you are a very zen individual and she's feeling the vibe. I'm curious. I do these talks each week on Fridays with members of the brewing community and the brewers there, and they often talk about this pursuit that they have to perfect whatever beer recipes they're working on, and this feeling that no matter what they do, they're always making small tweaks here and there. Did this period of kind of slowed business and slowed production give any of you an opportunity to revisit your approach to making your spirits and consider small changes here and there that may have been picked up if your business was much faster, but now that there might be a little bit more of a gap between a guest visit or experience with your product, you had that time to make a change that you wanted to make? No?
No one?
Huh. I'm fascinated by that.
Well, I tell you what, from a bourbon perspective, I mean, our bourbon's 3 years old, so you don't, you might overthink it sometimes. And so we got our mash bill and our processes set, and we're pretty happy with them, 5 years ago. And then we kind of implemented some things 4 years ago. So the what has changed, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, our head distiller used to design telemetry for space launch vehicles. So we have more telemetry on our little bitty still than Brian does probably at Sagamore. I mean, so it is anal retentive on process, making sure everything's exactly the same. I mean, it's idiotic. We grow our own corn. That's how we are with the supply chain. But the variances in there are what time of year you barrel, what time of year you distill, and each individual barrel is its own personality. They all taste different. So you're going to get enough variations just from the barrel and the time of year. Not a whole lot, but you're going to get you can tell the difference from barrel to barrel. And we do all single barrel, so we don't meritage anything. It's all going into one. And that's what we find a lot of our customers, they value that, they appreciate that, they like seeing it there. I mean, that's just from our perspective. I know other people do it a little bit different, but yeah, we didn't want to overthink this and change kind of a proven mash bill down during COVID just because we were all jumpy and couldn't get out.
Yeah, I'll echo that. As soon as you kind of find something, we love the brewers, but they get to come out with a new beer every week or every 2 weeks or every other day if they want. Once we've kind of got our recipe, I'll be damned if I don't want to just keep filling barrels with that awesome recipe. It's not really something we tweak. That's not to say we're not going to experiment with some finishes or something like that, but if we like what we're doing, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you put a distillate, you come off the still, you evaluate your distillate, and you feel good about it. But then you put it in the wood, and at 6 months, you're like, okay, I think it's still hanging in there. And it is until about 3 years or so, you're like, okay, so it's 3 years before we say, what would I do different now? Because it's just now starting to kind of get somewhere, and kind of like Dan says, it's like, but it takes so long to get anywhere, and if we could age whiskey and every 2 weeks or so, that might be different. But it's just kind of like, for us being young, we're just now kind of getting to a place where we even understand what we made 3 years ago, 4 years ago, kind of thing. So
and we use a number 3 char just because it's I'll call it an industry. It's not industry standard, but a lot of people use number 3 char. It works out, and people ask us, "Well, are you going to experiment with other chars?" And we're like, "No, it'll be 4 years before we know what it tastes like." So we're not going to do that Buffalo Trace using this part of the tree for that and that part of the tree for that. That takes 20 years to do.
Well, that's good insight, and it's an interesting way to approach it. I find it fascinating just because you're all in this pursuit of craft and excellence, and I'm always curious as your process goes. Even though you may be putting something in barrels for a few years, I'm certain that through your process of producing spirits, I just figured you might come up with things that you want to try a little bit differently the next time to see if it yields a different result.
Yeah, I think people always the time, like, maybe playing with feed rates on their stills, or, your grain's a great example. Like, it all starts there, right? And so who you got your grain from, storage, cleaning it, all those types of things can play a role. But so I'm sure there's more to it than what we say, but it is one of those things, like, it's a lot of hard work to get it into that barrel where it's just like, now it's kind of like, I think this is a pretty patient group is probably what we got Mr. Zen too. Like, you got to be, like, it's like, it takes so long. But I think, once we get somewhere in 3, 5, 10 years, there'll always be tweaks and so forth, and some R&D sitting on the side. But I think there's also a value in a consistent product, right? And so I think the consumers look for that. If they fall in love with your product, they expect it to kind of taste that way each time. So you want to, if you could improve it, of course we always will, but we don't want to have new products all the time.
That makes sense. And I think that it's kind of the flip side of the coin that Scott had with single barrel releases, and the ability to kind of tell that story through variation in what the product might be. But you have options now as a consumer to explore both sides of that coin. If you're looking for something that offers consistency, there are brands out there that are fully capable of doing that. If you want slight variation to understand what impact the environment may have on your experience, then you've got single barrel options and things like that out in the market.
I think some of the ways that we can differentiate is from the, we do 90 proof bourbon. That's just kind of the way we like it. There's others that they're awesome taste, but they just do it different in mash bills. But you can get, you can do a bottled and bond. You can do a barrel strength. There's about 3 or 4 different products you can get out of the same barrel. So that's the variation we're looking to play with, not as much the mash bill and those type of things.
So can we talk a little bit about what these variations mean for maybe the layperson who's tuning into this in a couple of days and isn't a whiskey expert? Can we talk a little bit about bottled and bond, cask strength, all these terms that may show up on a label that might be confusing to somebody walking through their local whiskey aisle?
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. So I just, the Bottle and Bond Act was, 1890s or something like that. It was actually the first Consumer Protection Act, I think, in the U.S., because we really didn't care about other stuff. We cared about whiskey in America. So because back then they would adulterate stuff. They would use tobacco juice. They'd mix stuff. They probably use turpentine. There was a lot of nasty stuff going into whiskey barrels, and people got fed up with it. So they had this Bottled and Bond Act, which meant there's a bunch of things, just like there's about 23 things on the protocol for making bourbon. It's basically a bourbon that has been made at one distillery in a single distilling season. There's 2 seasons a year, and it's bottled at 100 proof, and it's in your bonded warehouse. So we're all small distillers. Boy, we all probably comply with Bottled and Bond if we would put it in at 100 proof. So we really don't have to change anything other than get a new deco on a bottle that says Bottled and Bond, and it's all, Bottled and Bond. I don't know, Brian or anybody else you can add to there. I think I hit most of it.
The only one I think you missed was the 4-year requirement.
Yeah.
Has to stay in those barrels for 4 years. So
basically what the consumer needs to know when they're looking at that is it means that it's a whiskey that was made during one season. So it's not a blend of 2 different whiskeys from 2 different seasons, something like that. It resided in the barrel for 4 years on a bonded premise, and it came out of one still.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought the 4 years, because historically, over time, they have changed that number. And it was always to the benefit of the huge distilleries, curiously, for some reason. So it got up to 12 years at one point. It was, so all these rules and regulations always benefit the big distilleries, I can tell you that.
Those with the most to lose, right?
Yeah.
Or those who want the biggest competitive advantage. We'll see how that works out.
Yeah.
Since we're kind of on this thing about what the consumer experience is like, what recommendations do you have for consumers when it comes to purchasing and seeking out new spirits? Dan, you and I talked a couple of months ago, and we were talking about making cocktails, and you gave me some good words to live by, and that was you're never going to tell anybody how to drink anything.
No.
But how do you help people find what they're looking for, and how do you suggest people go about looking for their favorite new whiskey?
It's funny. I want to get everybody else's opinion on this, because how many times does somebody come in with a group and they say, oh, well, I only drink Scotch. And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure you're in the wrong region for that, but whatever. Here, let's see what we can do. If you only drink Scotch, then let me point you in this direction. Or if you only drink gin, then I can start getting you excited about some rums or something, if you're open to it. But what does everybody else think?
I think it comes with a little bit of education. One of the things I always fight against is just a natural tendency when somebody's at the tasting bar for me and you pour them in a little tasting glass, they just want to take it and throw it back. We're just all ingrained with that kind of that younger mentality of just throw the shot back. But, we try to educate on the glass, why the shape of the glass is important. We educate on why we make the spirits the way that we do, what contributes to the flavors that are in the glass, and why you shouldn't shoot it. Allow your taste buds to adjust to the burn of the alcohol, and then take a second sip. And everyone's always like, yeah, wow, I can really taste it now. Like, exactly, you didn't throw it down your throat. Take your time with it, smell it. What is, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, smell is what, 70% of what you taste? So yeah, just slow down, take your time with it. So many people come in with that same sentiment that Dan was just talking about and say, I'm a bourbon drinker, I don't really like rum. Okay, well, let's try this. Listen to what we have to say, take your time in the glass, and then I'd say probably 9 times out of 10 they walk out the door with the bottle.
Yeah, one of the things we did experiment with in COVID on a personal level, we couldn't do it at the tasting room, was just do some personal tastings. And so we I had some miscellaneous, I had some Sagamore, I had some from Baltimore Spirits Company, and we have a little bit. And we'd try, and boy, I'd love to have that Lost Ark 49% rye. That sounds interesting. That's awesome. And we had people walk through it, and it's like you can't pick which one of your grandmother's cookies the best. They're all really damn good, and you celebrate the differences. So people thought it was going to be okay. Who's best? It's like, no, you're just figuring out what's. Here's they're all different, but these are all good. And what we're doing in Maryland now is really cool. We've graduated from where we were a few years ago. We're maturing, and we're really putting out quality product.
And I think too, to Scott's point, what I've seen too is the average consumer seems to be more educated than they were even a couple of years ago, and that they are excited that you get excited about your product or what spirit you're talking about. And I think that even just helps them to maybe go through or go and try something they might not have otherwise tried, or explore outside of their comfort zone a little bit, or take a drive, somewhere a little further away from where they live, just to get the experience as part of the drink itself, and how those two can be connected. And I think that's been a big thing that we've seen too as well.
I think the larger movement of food and craft alcohol in general is definitely driving people to try and explore new things. Like, the goal is to say, hey, I've had this experience with this, and it gives me something to talk about when I'm around friends, or when I'm sharing whatever I'm sharing on social media. There's a lot of benefits to this, because people are kind of getting out of that idea of being a one brand buyer. At least maybe the younger crowd is getting that way. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, like Brad said, with the education, to give people that opportunity to come in and learn, and then take away with them what they really think about it, which is great, because you're giving them that experience option. How are you able to manage the education piece with limitations in your tasting rooms?
It's been difficult. So we're doing our area is kind of small, where we do our tours. So we're not doing any physical tours in place now. But what we did was we created a virtual tour. We just videoed myself giving the tour and walking through, and we keep that set up and have a walk area where people can walk in and watch the video tour. It's 3 or 4 minutes long, very condensed, but to keep people moving through. We don't want them hanging too long. And then any of our tastings, we have outdoor seating right now, so we try to do the tastings outside.
And I think for us too, I mean, we've tried to have our staff be as, know as much as anybody else here. The guys that are serving the drinks at the bar, in the tasting room, even if there's only 10 people in there, at least that those people that they're getting drinks from, they know every step of the process, from the mash bill to the aging process to, what things people may like based on suggestions. And we try to educate our staff to be just as knowledgeable as we are, so that when it comes time to the customer experience, that they're having, the same experience or as good a time with any single person that might be there. Can help them along that journey to kind of maybe figure out whatever they really want to get out of the product.
Yeah, I mean, it's the tasting rooms are our number one recruiting tool, and so that is an opportunity to talk about who your brand is, what your products are, what makes them maybe unique or different, and talk through the tasting notes. And like you said, there's one, I would never tell anybody how to drink it. They're always like, how should I be drinking this? It's like, you want to mix it with ginger ale, it's your drink. I'm not here to tell you no. And I'm with Brad, just when they fire it back, you're like, you just missed it. You missed the whole point of this thing. It took 4 years to get here. And whereas I'm always like, never judge a spirit until that second sip. Like, that mouth acclimation is huge. And so for us to be able, we don't have really tastings at retail stores either, where we have that opportunity to meet with consumers that might be shopping. So, again, we're kind of still discovery brands. So these tasting rooms are incredibly important. We have been able to run them a little bit, but nothing like we have in the past. We don't let anybody into the distillery right now, just into our tasting rooms. And I think we've done as best a job we could, all things considered. But, it's always masks and 6 feet apart. And when we can be outdoors, we'll be outdoors. And I think we're going to be like this for a little while. But so far, everybody's experience has been very positive, and everyone has stayed healthy. And we really limit capacity. In a lot of ways, what we're doing now is we've kind of decided that there's just a flat fee. So if you're one person or 10 people, it's yours. And just kind of, it's a flat fee. And so maybe it's not the best deal if you're one person. It's a great deal if you're 8 to 10. And then you don't have to worry about who else is in the room and so forth. But just trying to create a safe environment and still be able to have that chance to tell people about who your brand is and taste them through your spirits, and where that spice is coming from. You talk about the rye grain or the caramel and the vanilla is where that's, that comes from the wood, and provide that education. It's so important for our brands.
Absolutely. As we start to wind things down, we're closing in on an hour. I'm wondering if there are any innovations in the process or new technologies on the horizon that any of you are keeping your eyes on that might be changing the game of distilling whiskeys and producing these great spirits for people? Or are we going to just keep rolling with kind of what tradition's been doing for the last couple hundred years?
I'd say the farmers are making great strides in what they can do with the grains, the yields, which grains they can research and bring out of the archives and bring us back into more of these heritage grains that we read the recipes that we were able to use, and now we're actually able to find them and have them grown for us again. I think that's kind of what I'm seeing as real technology that's being applied to us. I mean, hell, has anybody really changed still design, demonstrably in the past 10 or 20 years? No. So, we got to look to these other corners, and different barrel types or whatever are interesting. But I really think what the farmers are doing is really groundbreaking.
That was a great pun.
Thanks.
What about stuff that you guys have personally on the horizon? We can go around the horn, starting with Brad and working our way around. What do you have coming up, or what's something in your list of projects that you're happy about and you'd like to share with people?
Well, we're always excited about our rum. I'm super excited about our Trailblazer bourbon and how we're going to branch that out with our small batches and single barrels and finishing series. But one of the coolest things I've ever worked on, we're actually releasing later this month, is a collaboration with the Getz family. And you may not know the name Getz, but I'm sure you're familiar with cowtails and caramel creams that you see at all the checkouts. They're actually located in Baltimore. They're celebrating their 125th anniversary. And we're working with them to create a caramel creams liqueur. So it'll be our first cream product. We're using cream from the same plant that they use dairy from. And we're using some of the same proprietary flavorings to get that caramel creams, that cowtail flavor into the liqueur that are also made in Baltimore. So super excited about that project. Comes out later this month.
That's
Very
awesome.
Cool.
Dan, what do you guys have coming out? Anything interesting?
We're as far as whiskeys go, we've gotten past the 2-year mark on our bourbon and on our rye. So we've got our straight bourbon and rye coming out at dates TBD. But so we're pretty excited about that. And just keep checking the Facebooks and Instagrams and all that, and you'll find it out.
That's awesome. Brian, what's Sagamore got on the horizon? You guys are putting out a bunch of great stuff pretty regularly. I'm looking forward to hearing about what you've got coming up.
We have, we just had the Manhattan finish come out, which was where we took 4-year, 7-month-old whiskey and then aged it for another year and 9 months in cherry brandy barrel, vermouth barrels, and bitters barrels. So that's really exciting. Then we have the Madeira finish coming out in the distillery only, and the Sauvignon Blanc finish that just came out. So just distillery only right now, very small, 200 bottle kind of thing. But later this month, we're doing our pennies proof, where you can buy 3 200 milliliters of our 100% Maryland-made product. That'll be 3.5 years old. And so our still's name's Penny. And so it's just kind of proof that we're headed in the right direction. And, last year we did a 2.5-year release. This year's a 3.5-year release. And there's just these, 3 200 milliliter bottles, and you buy it for a penny. There's about 597 of them. And you can kind of follow along the journey of our product aging here in Maryland. And so it's just kind of, we call it sip, share, and savor. So you kind of can do sip it now, share with your friends, and savor later, and compare it next year to the 4.5 and so forth, and kind of follow along. So that's later this month.
That's really cool. Scott, we shared a couple of things this morning about what you guys have going on. You want to talk about all the exciting stuff that Tobacco Barn's working on?
Yeah, it's, our straight bourbon that we're putting out now is about 3 years in a number 3 char 30-gallon barrel. And so we'll have that going for a while. Our first 53 is now 4 years old. We're going to hold on to that for a while. And then our 53s we're all in 53s now. And so we'll have that in a couple years. We'll get through the 30s right now. And like I said, we'll do a bottle and bond, and then we'll also do some, a barrel proof or maybe a double cask, those type of things. But I think the other thing is just the collaboration thing. I know several people here were working on some collaboration within the Distillers Guild, everybody's getting together to kind of raise money for the guild and do those type of things. I think that kind of doubles the creativity, because as you can see, everybody on this call has got some great ideas. And then, as you know, we're doing this wacky thing where we're flying 4 25-gallon barrels on a Harrier jet next spring, which will be awesome. Which I think that just shows how cool the comptroller's office is. Comptroller Francho, he sent a guy down here when NBC was filming us they went through the motions. Lou was down here. Everybody knows Lou at the comptroller's office. Lou was down here next to a Harrier jet, and he gave us the approval for our offsite storage permit and a drop tank from a Harrier jet. That picture itself was worth it.
That's cool.
That is a really great story about how our regulators here in the state really want to see this industry succeed.
They're helping out. Yeah, if it wasn't for them, yeah. It took about 2 phone calls before they realized I wasn't crazy and that I was serious about putting bourbon on a Harrier jet. But they did answer my phone calls after the second one.
They may have still thought you were a little crazy. You just were serious.
Yeah, they still do. They think we're nuts. But it's all for charity. We're only getting 600 bottles. I mean, if the damn barrels don't explode, I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, this could be the new innovation that we're all looking for in whiskey production. When Scott figures out that you can age these bourbons like this when you're going 700 miles an hour, you'll be set to rock and roll.
You do not want it. It costs too much money. We could not do this if it wasn't for charity. This costs way too much money.
And John, what kinds of things do you guys have going on at Twin Valley?
Well, if I ever find a place in Montgomery County to park a Harrier jet, Scott's in trouble. But until then, like I said, Edgar back here, he's always experimenting. We're trying some absinthe maybe down the pipeline. We'll see how that goes. We're going to probably bring back some of our fruit brandy that we did a couple years ago. Haven't done it here in the new location, so we're excited to try it, on a full-size scale. And then hopefully this time next year we'll have a few other flavored bourbons, maybe some flavored whiskeys, pecan, maple, something like that, something a little fall flavored and maybe a little bit more palatable to some non-traditionalists like we are. We're definitely a neat, maybe a single ice cube or something like that kind of group. But I think that we are definitely not indicative of every single person that likes bourbon. It might be a nice little foray into bourbon for some people to try and get a flavor or something like that, and pull the string a little bit, and then, we'll get them on the cask strength stuff eventually.
I like that ambition. That's good. All right. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for joining me this afternoon and taking the time to share your stories. It's been great. It's nice to catch up with all of you. I don't get to see you in person enough anymore, and I very much miss that. So great seeing you all. You're all looking healthy and well, and thank you for everything you're doing for this great industry here in the state of Maryland.
You too, Jim.
Good seeing you, Jim. Good seeing everybody.
For everybody who tuned in this afternoon, thank you very much for spending some time with us. It is Maryland Spirits Month. Please consider supporting Maryland Distillery this weekend when you go out and visit your local retailer or go visit some of these distilleries. Now, there have been some new regulations passed forward through executive order by the governor. Baltimore City has new regulations. I understand that Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County, we're going to add some new things today. And Montgomery County has some new regulations. So get familiar with what's going on regarding what's allowed. Wear your mask, stay safe. Visit marylandspirits.org for updates about Maryland Spirits Month. Show all of these great distilleries your love. And thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.